Okay, let's get started. My name is Alix Soliman. I'm the climate and environment reporter at KTOO, and I'll be your moderator tonight. Thanks for choosing to spend your evening at KTOO's Glacial Outburst Flood Panel. Before we begin, I'd like to announce that KTOO's podcast Outburst won a first place Alaska Press Club Award for Best Narrative Audio Program and second place National Public Media Journalists Association Award for a narrative produced program. There are some of you in this room, thank you. There are some of you in this room who graciously invited me into your homes and told me your personal flood stories, who explained the science and shared public policy perspectives. Thank you so much for being part of it, and I'm hoping to put together a bonus episode this year. Now I'd like to introduce our panel, starting from the end farthest from me. First, we have Nate Rumsey, Deputy Director of Engineering and Public Works at the City and Borough of Juneau. Then we have Denise Koch, Director of Engineering and Public Works at the City and Borough of Juneau. And then we have Sabrina Grubitz, Public Safety Manager at Central Council of the Tlingit and Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska. Jason Amundson, Geophysicist and Professor at University of Alaska Southeast. Aaron Jacobs, Senior Service Hydrologist at the National Weather Service. Jamie Pierce, Hydrologist at U.S. Geological Survey. Daryl Downing, Emergency Management Specialist at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and Mike Records, Hydraulic Engineer at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Thank you guys so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time. My first question is for the Army Corps and the city. How much do you expect to pay for the HESCO flood wall each year, and what's the expiration date on that temporary fix? Let's start on the city's end.
So in 2025, when we first built what we call phase one, it cost approximately $7 million to construct. In advance of the 2026 flood, we largely had to reconstruct our phase one, and we're not completely done, but we're substantially complete. We'll have a max budget for that reconstruction of $14.8 million.
And to answer for the Army Corps of Engineers, to date, the Army Corps of Engineers has spent just over $50 million in the last couple years to support the City and Borough of Juneau. This year, phase two efforts, the Corps is spending approximately $35 million on our contract to help implement the installation of these barriers and placement of riprap along the riverbank at key locations, as well as building a flood berm near Back Loop Bridge.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, I know the city is lean on funds right now. How is the city planning to pay for HESCO in following years?
I want to first announce that on July 20th, we're going to have a special committee of the whole that's with our assembly to talk about the future of how we pay for flood fighting and GLOF expenses in general. In terms of the mitigation for phase one and those costs that I just mentioned, we have also been very aggressively pursuing outside funding streams. So we've gotten from the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation. They have a state revolving loan fund. We have almost a $25 million loan with them that's 50% forgivable. We also have a $1 million partnership agreement with the U.S. Forest Service. Last year, we were a subrecipient of a Tlingit and Haida Regional Housing Authority grant that got us about $800,000. And this year also, we're pleased to work with Tlingit and Haida Regional Housing Authority as a subrecipient and received approximately $500,000. So we are pursuing as much outside funding as possible, and also just really, really pleased to announce that Representative Begich got a congressionally directed spending, or CDS, for $3.2 million to assist the city with HESCO work going forward.
Thank you. And I'd also like to ask, so the city and Army Corps had to completely rebuild HESCO this year. It has been billed as a temporary solution. Do you guys see yourselves rebuilding HESCO indefinitely, or is it truly a temporary solution? What's the expiration date on it?
So I'll start and ask Denise and Nate to jump in from the CBJ perspective. So currently, the Army Corps of Engineers is helping to install Phase 2, which was not a complete reconstruct, it was a brand new construction. The reconstruction efforts and damage is largely going to be determined based on the flood and the damage that it caused. If there's a minimal flood, there could be minimal operations and maintenance that is required. If there's a larger flood, there could be larger damages. So ultimately, that's going to be up to what the water does during the actual flood.
Right. My question is to the lifetime of the HESCO as a temporary solution. In terms of years estimate, just give me a ballpark number.
The ballpark estimate in good conditions, these HESCO gabion basket structures typically can last about 5 years as a temporary solution. Again, a lot of times that'll be dependent on site conditions. UV rays play a lot into the fabric that these gabion baskets are built of, but also based on the water and how the water flows, they could last a little bit less, they could last a little bit longer.
Thank you. I know lots of people in this room want to focus on a permanent solution. At the charrette in December, federal and local leaders agreed on a tunnel or lake tap through Bullard Mountain to continuously drain Suicide Basin. The community appears to be rallying around that solution. This is a question for the whole panel. What are the obstacles to advancing this solution, and realistically, how soon could a tunnel go in? Who would like to take this one first? You can go ahead and just raise your hand and start talking. I see eyebrows from Denise.
Okay, I'll start. So as you mentioned, after the charrette in December of 2025, we came out of that. CBJ issued a press release with our partners, Tlingit and Haida, and the U.S. Forest Service saying that a lake tap tunnel was our preferred alternative. So we were really excited about it. We remain excited about a tunnel as an enduring solution. And I know initially in that charrette, although a tunnel had the lowest cost of all of the alternatives that were presented, it was still a lot of money. Now, it was very, very basic initial design, but it was anywhere from $600 million to almost $1 billion. That's a pretty hefty price tag. And I just want to really give kudos to the local mining community. In February, I went to Alaska Miners Association breakfast and talked about CBJ's preference for a lake tap tunnel, and talked about, very early days in terms of design, but some of the associated costs, some of the associated methodology, and very quickly after that, representatives from both Hecla Greens Creek and Core's Kensington mine engaged with us. We've had really productive conversations with them ever since then, where they have talked about ways that they think that tunnel could be put in potentially faster, potentially cheaper, and that's kind of reinvigorated at least the CBJ position and strengthened the CBJ position and our excitement about a tunnel. So we've I think been on Team Tunnel ever since the charrette. We do understand and respect that our very close partners at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers needed to do due diligence for a number of different options, but the tunnel has been the CBJ preferred alternative. We have advocated with our congressional delegation for that alternative.
Thank you, Denise. The tunnel would be on federal land and managed by federal agencies, so directed at Army Corps. What are the obstacles to advancing this solution, and realistically, how soon could a tunnel go in?
I think what Denise said about due diligence is a really good point, that we need to fully investigate a solution or a measure before we can pursue it, and that really is my volume okay?
I think it is now.
And that really is, you could call it a challenge, but it's a reality that we have to deal with. And then there's also the reality that a solution like a tunnel would take years to construct, and there are going to be years of flooding before that. So that is another challenge. We also need to be addressing flooding in the interim and putting our staffing capacity towards that as well. In terms of time, it's too early to say when that would start. We don't know. We're looking into that, and then that's part of the due diligence is really trying to nail that down.
Right, especially since HESCO might only last 5 years, and then is there supposed to be a gap period between that and then a permanent solution like a tunnel, and so what are you going to do in the meantime? Okay. Last week, Brian Erickson, Vice President of Hecla Mining, presented a version of the tunnel that would cost half as much as what the Army Corps proposed in its charrette report. On Monday, Brigadier General Getz visited Greens Creek to assess potential engineering and mining capabilities. The Army Corps has repeatedly said all options are on the table. My question is, what could a public-private partnership look like with local mining experts, and how seriously is the Army Corps considering it?
I know you're not going to like this answer, probably, but at some level, we're working on figuring that out. That is. Speak into the microphone. Okay. That is the due diligence that we're doing, is working to understand what that relationship would look like. We understand and value the local expertise that's here, and we're really trying to leverage that and figure out what that relationship could look like.
Is the idea that you would take their recommendations to focus on mining methods instead of a tunnel boring machine, which would make it substantially cheaper, or so they've said?
That is a possibility.
At a Juneau Assembly meeting last month, you estimated that Suicide Basin will be capable of releasing damaging glacial outburst floods for roughly another 25 years. Mike, how did you arrive at that estimate?
So that is based on both knowledge of Suicide Basin as well as analog outburst basins in the area. Specifically, one of them is Lake No Lake, which is, I understand, having an outburst event right now. And traditional hydrology methods for engineering design, you usually, flooding is not unusual, but what is unusual at this is the sudden onset. So usually you have a lot longer period of record that you can use for developing these annual exceedance probability events, which are historically have been called, for example, like a 100-year event, but we would try to say that that's a 1% annual exceedance probability event. So the question is, how do we fit this unusual flooding problem into an engineering framework that we can use for our risk-based design? And so how we did that is we looked at how the basin has evolved to date, projected that forward with the information we have about the basin's geometry, how the ice dam, the Mendenhall Glacier is thinning, how that calving face in Suicide Basin is changing. So basically change over time in Suicide Basin, and then looked at other analog outburst systems. So that'd be Lake No Lake. Another example would be the Snow Glacier up in south central Alaska, which has a period of record of 70 years, and basically looked at the variability between events of peak discharge of those events, and looked at and then applied that variability to Suicide Basin.
Okay. And for the wider panel, do you agree with that 25-year estimate, or do you have other estimates to share? And what are the major things that could change that estimate? I'm looking at the middle three right here.
I would say I would largely agree with that. It's hard to put an exact number on when we're going to reach a peak. There's this diagram up here now, which is just a conceptual diagram about how outburst floods would evolve during time as the glacier is retreating. And so as a glacier retreats, a basin forms, it gets bigger, eventually it starts to get smaller as the glacier retreats past it. And so the crux of this is figuring out where we are on this curve. We're going to have large outburst floods for a number of years still. I just don't know exactly where we are on that curve, if it's going to be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And I think from an engineering perspective and trying to design a sustainable, enduring solution, you need to think about kind of worst case scenarios, not just not just thinking about where we are right now, and but just really taking into account what could possibly happen. And the big source of uncertainty we have is how is the basin expanding laterally, as Mike was saying, that we have really good control on how fast the glacier is thinning, how quickly that ice dam is thinning. We have really good numbers on how much ice is in the basin that's occupying space that could otherwise be filled with water. But it's really that dynamic boundary between the Mendenhall Glacier and Suicide Basin that we don't know how to model or to project into the future. And maybe I'll just add to this, the other, to help understand some of the uncertainty and thinking about the numbers that are out there in terms of what sort of flood magnitudes we could have in the future. I think we can do a pretty good job of estimating sort of from one year to the next how big a flood is going to get, but it's a little bit like thinking about sea level rise. We know sea level is rising, and we could say with a fair amount of confidence how high sea level is going to be next year, but if you go out 100 years, it's much harder because the uncertainty starts to grow, and it's the same sort of situation here.
Great. And Aaron and Jamie, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. I think because of the uncertainty, the best thing we can do is just monitor closely like we are and doing it as frequently as possible because even like Mike said, data is everything in the record. The longer the record, the better. So a lot of these time series are fairly new time series, Mendenhall being one of the exceptions. We have a fairly long time series, but in terms of just big flooding, we don't. So we can only use time series in what we have actually to make some of these projections.
The monitoring is probably the biggest thing, keeping an eye on what's going on within the basin, doing the drone surveys, continuing to do this measurement so we have a good idea on the volume. The volume is the big thing that really drives these floods. Then also how fast that water can leave Suicide Basin and get to Mendenhall Lake. And that's also a bigger unknown, and we don't really know that until we're in the event, but we have analogs of the last couple of years to figure out that efficiency, how fast or how efficient we can get that water from the basin into Mendenhall Lake, and that will also dictate the peakiness or how high the water can get, even with the same volume that we have in there.
Great, that's a good segue. We've talked about some of the big picture things. I'd like to get into expectations and planning for the next flood. Jason, this question's for you. What is the latest Suicide Basin volume estimate, and how does it compare to past years?
So I don't have an exact number on what the volume is because we don't really get that until after it drains, and we go up there and survey right before it drains and then afterwards, so then we know exactly what the volume was. But our current estimates are that it looks very similar to last year. The ice dam has thinned by 10 to 15 feet, so that means that it can hold less water, but the icebergs have also melted somewhat from last year, and I think those two things basically cancel out with each other. And then the third part of the equation is that changes in the location of the ice dam, the lateral extent of the basin, and it looks like it hasn't changed really all that much from last year at this time. So my expectation is that we should see a similar sort of volume to what we had last year.
Yeah.
And can you go ahead and describe what we're seeing?
Oh, yeah. So here's a drone survey from June 1st of this year. And can I?
I don't know.
Does this allow me to flip back?
I think you can point at that.
Oh, okay. Yep, so June 1st of this year, the lower right part is Suicide Basin itself with icebergs in it, and then the upper left and the kind of lower left would be the Mendenhall Glacier itself. And then, how do I do this? This is June 10th of last year, just comparing it. At those 2 days, the water level was about the same. And I don't know can you go back and forth or not? Mm-hmm. How do you do that? Nope. There we go. So if you just flip back and forth between those two, you can see the water level in the lower right is pretty much the same those 2 days, and the location of the ice dam has also not changed all that much.
Aaron, I know you're always looking at the hydrographs, which display water level information over time. Can you describe the timeline of past glacial outburst floods from when the basin fills to when the river level recedes to normal?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I have notes here, so just bear with me. But so once we get to a full basin, right now that elevation is about 1350, 1352 in elevation. Currently, we're about like 1248. And when we do have a full basin, when we get to that 1350, 1352, that's kind of when we're primed, we're overtopping, water spilling over that spillway. And in the past, we've seen the subglacial release. So when the water lifts the Mendenhall up and water starts flowing underneath the Mendenhall Glacier, it's about 2 to 6 days after this overtopping. Could it not go in that time frame? Yes. Could it go earlier? Yes. But that's just what we have seen in the past. Of when we see a full basin, it's taken about 2 to 6 days for it to build up enough pressure to lift up the glacier to start draining the water. And so once that starts, it's about 16 hours before we get to at least minor flood stage, which is 9 feet on the Mendenhall Lake gauge. From that time frame, let's see here, it takes about 8 to 9 hours from that to get to a major flood stage. And to get back to the minor flood stage, that's when we have a relatively normal flow. So normal flow is about 5 feet on the gauge, or about 3,000 CFS, and that's like the base flow. Last year, if you guys all remember, we had the Amundson River. Well, that base flow started at about 9 feet, or about 8 to 9,000 CFS. So just to have a variation of where we saw last year. But typically, we'll see about 16 hours to go from when an event starts to when we start seeing some minor impacts. And then from there, 8 to 9 hours after that, we start seeing major flood stage. That's 14 feet on the gauge, and that's when water starts hitting the HESCO barriers. And then after that, it stays above major flood stage for roughly about 12 hours. So we're at that high level, above 14 feet, water hitting the HESCOs for about 12 hours of the whole event. And then going back down to minor flood stage after that, it takes a total of 55 hours. From the very beginning to the very end, it's a total of 55 hours of the event.
Okay, awesome, thank you, that's great. And what is the latest window of time for when you think the basin might be full?
Very good question, and we've been tracking this ever since we've gotten the first imagery from the USGS on seeing the images in the basin to get the levels and the inflow. We're able to now utilize some historical information on the amount of water that's flowing through the Mendenhall Lake gauge, and from that we can kind of have an idea of when we could see a full basin. And so right now those calculations are about the window, like the earliest we could see a full basin would be July 29th, and the latest we could see a full basin would be August 11th. But the most likely time that we'll see a full basin is probably that first week of August. And then again, that's just when we'll see a full basin. It's not when the event starts. It has, like, we'll see some timing after that full basin for the event to start. But that is the window that we're kind of looking at.
And moving through the summer, what are the major things that will control whether that we hit earlier or later in that window?
So the main, or if you want to go back to the images there, just go back to the, yeah. And so the main inflow that drives Suicide Basin is that waterfall in the back of the camera image, and that's really driven by precipitation and temperature. So what could really increase the timing that we could see a full basin or make it later is how warm or how wet we are. You guys remember 2024, we were very wet, record wet July. So even though we were a very cool spring, we're able to catch up to 2023 just from the month of July for the outburst flood to take place on the very same day. Last year we didn't have that, so that's why we were about 2 weeks delayed because of the cool spring and then the relatively normal-ish summer that we had in the June and July.
Great, thank you. Jamie was just up at the basin recently. Can you tell me what you're measuring and what's new for you this year in terms of equipment?
Yeah, absolutely. If I could get through some, just give everyone real quick some background, just to reorient everybody. Hello. We have been up there and monitoring since 2011. We, this year, have added a few more systems to just make it a little bit more redundant. The primary systems is an oblique mounted stationary laser that is pointed down straight at the surface of the ice, and I've added one more as a backup to that. The problem with that is that it creates periods where we have low visibility, fog and clouds, and so it obscures the laser's ability to hit the surface of the ice. And even when it does hit the surface, sometimes just by virtue of it hitting the ice, it'll reflect off of it and not give us a strong return signal. So, so on the just the monitoring standpoint, so the lasers, we've added one more, and we're getting good data back from that. As of right now, we actually haven't had a reported signal since the 26th. I'm working that out. We'll have that back online here. But with that, we also have all of our cameras, and we've added more cameras, more coming online, and those will be presented on the National Weather Service website as well as the USGS's websites under HVIS, which is our national hydrological viewing information system. And we will have that in place at all these different points, going at a fairly high resolution. So the idea being, as we're monitoring, we're looking very closely for the moment that that basin drops, because that's everything. The ice has to yield at some point to the water because the water is denser than the ice. And so we want to know the moment that water comes out for a multitude of reasons. And so we're trying to refine our techniques and methods in order to be able to do that. Last year, we saw water coming in. It was spilling for quite a while. The spilling event happened a little bit longer, and so before the water actually transitioned into subglacial, and had to readjust the timing of the forecast. So to improve that, what we've done is try to look at other systems around the world. Well, there's not many, but we've partnered with a branch of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, CREL, and do I just advance by pushing that?
Yep.
Okay, so just real quick here, 2 lasers. L1 is the top one. L2 is the one that I lowered here. What I want you to see, the top image is not this year's ice. That's just more just in terms of reference. The bottom 2 are this year, and the open water is very minimal up there, whereas what we're hitting is a lot of the ice. So to deal with that, what we do is Jason and UAS do repeat drone surveys, so we not only get water surface that day, but then we further constrain that with getting down to the water and surveying, okay? So we're actually constraining and verifying that what the water surface actually is. By virtue of just being very careful to the top end, because we are volumetrically calculating, we need to know exactly how much water is in there. So we're adding all these systems together. So because of the compromised view that we had with the how do I go back? Is it this? The red one. The red one. Okay. Because of this is an illustration of when we do have data gaps. These data gaps could exceed 12 hours, and as we get close to time when water gets to flood, anxiety levels go high. So we needed to be able to address that. So what we did is we contacted CREL. CREL actually just rather serendipitously has been working on a system almost very similar in terms of terrain and methods to measuring glaciers in Greenland. And what they did is they built a standalone system that's fully automated that is able to, in real time, transmit basically point cloud data like the DEMs that we fly, and run the scan, run a survey, process, upload it, transfer it, and download it within less than 6 hours from Maine, and they're working in Greenland. The idea of bringing that technology here, so we worked out a process for them to come, and what we're going to do is do some feasibility studies with the laser with the hopes of increasing some of those periods of anxiety by just increasing not only the strength of the laser, but the period and timing that we are going to be doing that. And it's not to take away the drone, it's really to just kind of complement them.
So, Jamie, is that additional monitoring going to help basically? So last year it was masked by rain. The start of the flood event was masked by rain.
So the rain was a big, the rain's a big problem.
Rain's a big problem.
And, although right now Colorado would really,
So I guess my question is this additional monitoring going to make it so that even if there is a big rain event at the same time or at the start of the flood, you will be able to detect that the flood has begun? Is that the idea?
There's more equipment up there to help us with it, because again, it's not one piece of equipment, it's a combination of all, so we can
Yeah,
read
so
a
we're
little
adding
bit.
all these things together, and really this was, the idea with this is feasibility this year, just kind of looking at, and independent of even the lasers that I have, so this would be the third one. We have our regular stage nitrogen system where it's a bubbler where I go down and it's pressure head. We measure pressure head, and that gives us a finer resolution hydrograph without all the bumps. Because we are calculating volume, we really wanted a smooth hydrograph, so we utilize that as well. We lean on the cameras heavily. We did add, so we have the 2 cameras. We have the 2 cameras that are facing and give us the oblique view. We've added one now to the spill. So what you're looking at here is a new installation of a spill camera. The picture on the left is of where the overflow happens. So you can see actually the channel that was incised once the water is flowing over the glacier. In a short amount of time, it scoured in excess of 12 feet a channel. And I wish I could just give you a photo tour of what all the icebergs that were floating and freeboards, as they migrated into the corner and then exited all the water. It was profound to see. We didn't have a visual of that, and that, for a lot of reasons, is important to us. So we've installed. I've installed a camera, and we're actually going to add another one this year. So we're trying to be heavy on visual capturing. So that's up in the basin. The last thing I will say is that really the biggest thing is just the frequency of the images. So we're trying to really just get the images out there more. So we go from hourly to about 30 minutes. Well, about every 30 minutes we'll have a picture out. Okay, so that's just up in the basin, and then we go downstream. So you want
Thank
to
you.
talk about that?
Maybe we'll come back to you in a second. Jason and Aaron, I wanted to ask also, I know that there's been more funding and more attention available for more monitoring on your ends too. What is new for you guys this year? Whoever wants to go first.
I'm not sure if there's anything that's that new from last year. We're continuing to do drone surveys every couple of weeks. I guess the one thing that is new is that we put out a couple of GPS receivers just upstream from the ice dam, and so we're starting to focus a lot of attention on trying to understand how that ice dam is evolving and whether we might see it expanding laterally or if it's going to kind of stay in a fixed location like it's done for the last couple of years. So I guess I would say that's our major new addition this year.
For the Weather Service, it's really just the additional information that we're getting from the USGS. They're our main entity to give us the monitoring and observations, and we kind of house it on the webpage and do the analysis. And one thing that we do on the analysis that with the information from Suicide Basin and the information from Mendenhall Lake, we're able to track the percentage of volume and when the hydrograph on the Mendenhall Lake starts to tip over and certain percentages of water still left in Suicide Basin. So we're developing a couple of more monitoring tools for when we're in the event to really get into the analysis to see how well the forecast is doing, if there's any adjustments that are needed, and then just also the time of when we could start seeing the peak due to like the amount of a certain amount of percentage of water has to release from Suicide Basin where the head pressure it reduces, so then the hole is actually starting to close. So that's when we start getting to the peak of the event, and we're actually able to, the past couple of years, we're able to calculate what that percentage is, so when we should start anticipating the tip over or we're in the peak of the event. So we're going to be utilizing those more tools this year more than we did last year, because the atmospheric river really masked the start of it. We didn't know where we were in the event. And that was the main change in the forecast last year, is that we thought we were at one portion in the timeline of the forecast of the event where we were actually about 18 hours into it. So that's where the shift is. And knowing what we know now, which we'll utilize this year, we'll be able to identify that. Even if an atmospheric river takes place, we'll identify where we're at in the event based on the information that we know from the previous years.
Awesome, thank you. Awesome. So I do want to talk a little bit about emergency preparedness next. I've heard from a couple of people who've used sandbags at their house in the past and said water leaked through. Can you share some of the common mistakes people make when putting sandbags around their house, and what is the right way to do it? And this is for City and Army Corps, probably.
I think, Daryl, were you going to take this one first?
Sure, I will absolutely take a start on this. So when we're sandbagging, also just want to let folks know, July 11th, the Army Corps of Engineers will be supporting a training event over here at Diamond Park with myself and multiple colleagues of mine from around the Corps. And we're going to be able to help answer more individual questions, but just some basics that you can kind of take and learn from is we typically always want to recommend 2 people fill sandbags at any given time. One typically holds the bag, one typically fills it. Just to give you a little perspective, a properly filled bag can weigh upwards of about 40 pounds. So that is maybe not for 1 or 2 bags a lot. But if you're moving 10, 20, 100 bags, that can be a lot. So we always recommend multiple folks working on as a team. As they fill them, some other folks, a lot of times they fill them to the top and then they tie the bags closed. We recommend no more than 2/3 full, and then we recommend folding the flap over. Because when you actually stack these sandbags, if you tie them, that creates a seepage path when you start stacking these in front of your house. So as this slide shows, you're basically folding it over. You want to place it upstream, so then it does not actually take the sand out when the water hits the sandbags. When you're actually placing these folded sandbags, you do want to leave a little bit of room in front of your property. Basically, if there is any seepage or underground water that seeps behind these sandbags, it basically will give some space to help pump that out with a pump or another method that a homeowner chooses. The next one, when you're actually building these sandbag walls, we definitely recommend either stepping on them or pressing on them so they're more like a brick. So you can see in this picture, you have a folded bag. They butt up right up against each other, so that minimizes seepage when you have one layer of bags. I believe on the next slide, you'll see when you stack them, you'll also want to stagger them because, again, that minimizes any seepage through these sandbags. And on the next slide, you can see the amount of sandbags that it takes depending on the height that you're looking to build a sandbag wall. There's 2 different ways that you can actually build these sandbag walls, a pyramid or essentially right on top of each other. A lot of times when you do a pyramid, it ultimately provides more protection when you have higher velocity of water. When you stack them on top of each other, it's very good protection when you're having more ponding water or not fast rising water. Again, both methods, we do recommend staggering them. And jumping to the next slide, I believe it is the pyramid slide again. As I tried to mention on the first slide, multiple folks, we always recommend filling and placing these bags because you can place a lot of sandbags and you can get tired out very, very quickly. So again, just kind of having that rotation of who's filling, who's placing, who's moving these bags, and then rotate with your counterparts.
And who's giving you a massage when it's over?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. Sabrina, can you share what flood support funding and services are available through Tlingit and Haida? I know you guys have been working on some things.
Alex, I was just going to see if I could add on to the sandbags super fast.
Yep, we got time.
Just to mention, Daryl had mentioned that July 11th, a training event at Diamond Park at the Field House. There'll also be a distribution event the next day on July 12th, and there'll be additional distribution events on July 18 at Diamond Park from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., and another event on July 25th from Diamond Park from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Those are distribution events. We will advertise that, we'll push that information out to the community, but we want to let this group know. Also just wanted to thank the Juneau Flood Solution Advocates. They are helping, as Daryl mentioned, these sandbags can be really, really heavy, and not everybody is able to move those bags. So they are trying to make these move sandbags for people who are not as mobile or having different challenges. So please remember Juneau Flood Solution Advocates as a resource as well.
Thank you so much. Sabrina, can you share what flood support funds and services are available through Tlingit and Haida?
Thank you, Alex, for the question. You know, a lot of what Tlingit and Haida has been doing, you know, and what we're bringing to the table really is the fact that being a federally recognized tribe provides access to Tlingit and Haida to apply to different funding sources that are not necessarily available to states and cities to apply for. And Denise has mentioned some of those resources that we've been able to tap into in the last couple of years in order to bring funding to the community, and not only just our tribal citizens, but the community as a whole. Tlingit and Haida leadership has found that, you know, helping the community as a whole is helping our citizens, and it's been highly pressed upon us, the importance of helping everyone. And so through that, we're able to apply to funding sources through FEMA that are tribally designed. We're able to also apply to different tribal or federal tribal programs through HUD and different things of that nature. So Tlingit and Haida Housing Authority is able to apply to those fundings specifically. And then there's also other programs that are designed for tribal governments that are not necessarily funding that's being brought in, but it's training our people. So there's different training resources and things like that that we're able to send our people to, so that when it is time to stand up and respond and prepare for, our people are fully trained and educated in responding to the disasters that we're seeing here in Juneau and really through Southeast. Another important piece too, I think, to bring forward to this is really the partnership that's been you know, molded together here with the city and our other partners. It takes partnership and coordinated effort to continue to make this issue an important issue at the congressional level, and working together and not in our own silos is extremely important. So coordinating that effort and energy and not competing with each other to go and find that funding is especially important. So, thank you.
Thanks so much. So I have only just a couple of more questions for the panel, and then we'll open it up to audience questions. So audience, you're welcome to form a line behind the microphone now. It is quite loud, so if you could step quietly, thank you. I want to know, are there any changes we should expect to see in safety or evacuation procedures this year? And this is for everyone.
Maybe I'll get started. So CBJ has been working with Tlingit and Haida and with some of the modelers at U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to plan for evacuation maps. And what that requires is thinking about the whole HESCO barrier system as a whole, thinking about the areas that are the highest risk, the most likely to breach, and what would happen if there was a HESCO breach at those locations, where the water would go, and also thinking about what roads would get flooded, thinking about exit strategies for residents. So a lot of work has gone into that. It's all really primarily driven by the modeling, and our emergency manager, Ryan O'Shaughnessy, unfortunately could not be here today, but he is planning on rolling out those evacuation maps next week. So look out for that.
Great. And can you share maybe how many more people are included in these versions of the flood maps than, or households, than last year's? Like, is it is it larger?
I can't give you an exact number, but I would say that it is larger, because what is different is we have a much larger HESCO barrier system, While we think that that's a good thing and we're confident in the HESCO barriers, there is always the potential that HESCO barriers could breach. And then if that happened, a consequence would be it's harder for the water to find its way back to the river, which means areas that are further downstream would see impact because the water's having a harder time getting back to the river.
And last year, you guys issued an evacuation advisory. I'm wondering, are we expecting to see the same thing this year, or is there a world in which there would be an evacuation order requirement?
So from CBJ's perspective, what you're going to see at the EOC is going to be pretty similar to what we had last year. We have this strong partnership with Tlingit and Haida in the Unified Command. We'll have additional resources from the Army Corps, and we will be very strongly advising people to evacuate, but we are not going to issue a mandatory evacuation order. The reason, though, that we want people really to evacuate is that, once again, we have worked as hard as possible, put all of our blood, sweat, and tears with our contractors into making these HESCO barriers as strong as they can be, but they can breach. And if they breach, you could wind up in a situation where you have very little time before water is inundating your house. It's going to look a lot like a flash flood. So we just want people to be as safe as possible. We care about everybody who lives in this community and very strongly advise people to evacuate, but we will not issue a mandatory evacuation order.
I got one comment on that. If there is, we do get a notification that there is a breach. So weather service will issue a flash flood warning. And what that means is that you will have, within that area, your wireless alert will go off, so your phone will go off saying that there is a breach in the area, and then we'll be updating that information of where exactly the breach is and where that floodwaters are going to. But the main thing that we're going to be changing up within our communication is that we're not going to ask people to try to leave the area. If you are remaining in an evacuation area, we're asking you to shelter in place, stay in your home, because the floodwaters will put you more at risk if you're on the roads than if you're staying in your home.
Thanks so much. Anything to add to that? Okay, great. And with that, we'll go to our audience Q&A. Can the first question asker please come up to the mic?
Good evening. My name is MJ Brandy, and I thank you.
One moment, I don't think our mic's on. Could you go ahead and start again? Yeah.
Good evening. My name is MJ Grandy, and I want to thank you for all the work you do, for all the creativity that you're showing in this response, for your dedication year after year. I want to just comment, you were asking, how long will the HESCO barriers last? We need to plan for 1 year. We need to deal with what each year is. I'm old enough, I remember Mississippi River floods after the Army Corps of Engineers came in and smoothed it all, and the increased velocity that had not been projected because it was beyond projection. So as we look at these curves, as we look at the behavior, we're getting it to the populated area. We've got our HESCO barriers. And I don't know about projections of increased velocity due to the lack of drag for embankments, the smoothing of the curves, all of those elements to be considered. I thank everybody for doing them 2 levels high, for stacking them like blocks to add that stability. And I just really plead with everybody here and our whole community that we behave like we care for each other. And thank you for the collaboration between our indigenous cultures. Thank you very much for being here. Gunishish. And thank you for the city for stepping up to collaborate. Still a lot of white men here. So thank you, everybody, for showing up and working together.
Thanks, MJ.
My name's Steve Bowie, and I have glacial gardens here in Juneau. And I also would like to echo or thank you. I know it's a tough job, and I just want to come to help. Yesterday I flew up and did my own survey of the basin, getting that bird's eye view really makes a difference. And I think I can speak for most of the people here that we're looking for a little hope. And almost everything we're discussing is living with the flood. And I think the key was spoken by the gentleman in the middle when he said 90% of the water that's entering the basin is coming from one waterfall. And that one waterfall happens to be about 50 feet from a flat spot where equipment could operate and catch that waterfall and put it in a suspended culvert down to the point that's on the western side, right by where the ice is caving into the basin. And even if we only capture 50% of the water, the basin would fill half as fast. And as you know, most likely, there's a lot of leakage already in the basin. And we don't know how much that leakage is because you can't measure the water till it empties. And you don't know how much water is under the ice, under the glacier, because you can't see it. But there's not enough water in the basin to float that glacier. So there has to get access. Maybe it's at the overflow point. The key still is to stop the water from filling the basin. And I know if you Google cable-supported water lines, you'll see them 1,600 to 2,000 feet long. And we've got maybe 1,000 feet. We've got about 300 foot of elevation drop, which lessens the weight. I know it's an expensive idea, but it's under 10 million. And I think that it's enduring. It can be emptied right on the other side of the bluff. It's on the other side of the basin. And I'd just like you guys to say that you're open to new ideas. Give the folks a little bit of hope. And I'd be happy to come down and meet with you and talk about displacement pumping that could help remove the rest of the water from the basin. I know it's a extreme working situation and very hazardous, but I've spent my whole life doing that. I don't want a job, but I do know there's people that do. And it really is an enduring solution that would really probably be the most environmental conscious. We know we got 10 years of environmental studies before we're dumping rock in the middle of Mindanao Lake. The tunnel idea is great, but I think it's kind of a pipe dream. Anyway, just want to say thank you, and let's keep our eyes open for the right idea and see if we can't make this a non-flood issue and let people get back to their lives. 10 years of HESCO barriers or 20 years of HESCO barriers. Yeah, and what a retirement, you know. Anyway, thanks again, guys.
Thank you. So I think the question was, would you guys consider diverting the waterfall from the former Suicide Glacier that's spilling into the basin as a enduring solution?
So just remove the inflow somehow. I mean, you could do the same and just remove it from the lake now. You could just convey it out of the, if you know the flow going into the basin, you could just remove it downstream too, or double the amount. But yeah, I mean, it would definitely something, I guess. I think there's a practical on it. Yeah.
This sort of water diversion was not in the Charette report. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, thanks for that comment and that creativity and that insight. I think you heard all options are on the table, so I'll just restate that. And again, that local expertise is also something that we're interested in, kind of like with these tunnel concepts. So again, that's appreciated. We really value that local expertise and recognize how important it is. And also that creativity. And that's something that we're really working on, is leveraging all of our experts around the country, both within the Army Corps and then our interagency partners here. So absolutely, all options are on the table. We need to look at everything. We are looking at everything, and we're leveraging all the resources we have to do that.
And we'll have the next person.
My name is Peter Andreg, and I live on Radcliffe down near the sewage treatment plant, so I'm near on the Delta. The first thing I have to say is what he said. That was really what I intended to ask the question, and so you've started to address it, because I haven't heard that talked about, and it seems like a reasonable solution. It seems like you could have taken a bunch of those HESCO barriers and put them there instead of along the river. So let me move on to another question that does address the HESCO barriers, because I live on the lower part of the river, and the river has never come close to topping its banks. But I know last year's flood, my understanding, was a little bit higher than the previous year. I wondered if you could address a little bit how much the HESCO barriers are contributing to that particular problem where I live on the river, because the floodwaters are still there. We've constricted the flow and moved the energy downstream. So have we created a problem with those HESCO barriers that increases my problem, since I live on the lower part of the river, with that energy of the floodwater moving downstream?
Thanks for the question. Who would like to answer this one?
Yeah, I can take that. Thanks for the question. I think that really highlights that the gabion barriers are a temporary solution, and why we are trying to move to a medium-term solutions is there's probably not a large, but there is probably a change in depth associated with conveying the water more rapidly down the river, and certainly also a change in velocity associated with it. And that is why the Army Corps has worked with CBJ to armor the banks more completely to protect those banks from higher velocities. But as we look at medium-term measures, that is also something that we're absolutely looking at is, are we just pushing the problem somewhere else? For example, a measure that has been suggested by a lot of people that we've looked at is cutoff channels, modifying the channel, and that is absolutely a concern with doing that is, although you may locally lower water surface elevations, you could increase velocities or depths other places. Or another medium-term measure that we're looking at is sheet pile walls. And one thing that sheet pile walls would have for them is that they are more robust against increased velocities. So we're really trying to address those concerns as we move forward, move from these ongoing flood fighting into medium-term measures.
Any other responses to that question?
Just the one comment about last year and how high it got from the previous year, and that a little bit of the increase was half of the increase from 2024 flood was 16 foot, and then last year was 16.65, and so about half of that 6.65 was from this basin expansion that Jason was talking about, the lateral extent, but the other half of that was from the atmospheric river. So you take away the atmospheric river, and then you still have a record flood, but a much smaller of a record flood. So the reason that you might have saw water still not go over your bank, but got close to it, was because we actually had more water. The water levels were much higher last year than the 2024 flood.
Next question.
Hi, my name's Kim Titus. I live on River Road. My question is about the communication plan. Last year, at about 10 in the morning, a few hours after the river started going down, the power went down on the back loop road, GCI went down, ACS went down. There was no communication, no cell phone coverage back there. So those couple hundred homes back there had no communication for 3 or 4 days. And power was restored, but no cell phone, no nothing back there, no internet. So telling the public back there to go to social media and to use your cell phone to communicate was a non-starter. They didn't work. And I think you need to go to an old-fashioned solution. You had all those placard boards on the back loop road because the bridge was closed for multiple days. You need to go to an old-school solution to communicate with people back there. because social media, cell phones, internet, that was all down. And I don't know whether ACS or GCI have done anything to improve that, but for those of us back there, to communicate, you basically had to drive all the way around and get back to the lower end of the valley before you could communicate. So my question is, what's your communication plan when all the power's down and all internet and all cell phone towers?
Thanks so much for the question.
I'll take a stab at that. First of all, thank you very much for that comment and bringing it forth. That's some of the value of having these community meetings. We can be better prepared for some of the problems that folks had during the event last year. We will, I like your idea about the placards. We'll think about that and make sure that we implement something that does not just rely on cell phone coverage. I do know that last year in some areas, but this was a different event for 2025 when we were really thinking about the impact being in the homes that are in the area of phase 1. Several days prior to the event, we did send out teams of volunteers to knock on doors and to hang information, put door hangers out, and maybe we need to this year expand the geographic scope of that effort.
And Denise, I'll just add, this is another good reminder to evacuate because of the possibility of limited communications during an event. Perhaps that's the most old school method, is to leave the impacted area before the flooding begins.
And then our next question, please.
Hi, my name's Beth Leibowitz, and I actually live on North Douglas rather than in the valley. But I have a concept question that I feel I need to put to you. We're talking about barriers and armoring the river. Is it possible to build a diversion, to basically dig out a diversion channel on city land on the other side of the river? I mean, that's messy, it's not pretty, but basically give the water somewhere else to go, so it's not just going down a narrow channel. Let it spread out, preferably not into a subdivision. Thank you.
Yeah, a diversion channel is something that we have and are continuing to look at in several different iterations, whether that is kind of higher up near the oxbows or lower down in the Wild Meadow neighborhood, but indeed, that is a good idea that we have looked at, and it doesn't necessarily completely solve the problem. It could absolutely reduce water levels throughout the Mendenhall Valley.
Our next question, please.
Good evening. My name's Tom Matisse. I'd like to acknowledge the hard work of all these people. I know this is a very small piece of your 50, 60-hour week work. Here you are at 7 o'clock at night doing it again. Thank you. We know that modeling for the basin is very difficult, and yet we've never known the full bathymetry of the basin. I know at one point in time we talked about ice-penetrating radar to maybe see the full bathymetry of the basin. Has there been any completion on that work?
So, now that the basin has drained completely, the last 2 years, we do know the bathymetry quite well. We have also done ice-penetrating radar surveys with a helicopter across basically the whole glacier, and part of that is to understand the geometry of the bedrock topography right near Suicide Basin, but also it's to help prepare for some larger scale glacier modeling to try and understand how far into, at what point in time will the glacier retreat past Suicide Basin. But yeah, now that the basin has started draining, so prior to 23, the basin never drained all the way to the bottom. So we never really knew what it looked like. But in 23, 24, 25, we've had drainages that went, if not to the bottom, very close to the bottom. And so we have a really good sense of what that shape is now.
Thanks for all your work, Jason. I'd like to say a special thanks too. A lot of people don't necessarily recognize, but Jamie Pierce has been doing this a long time. As a civilian, as a student, and as at USGS, we couldn't do it without you. So
thank you, Tom. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for the question, Tom. And I also will just add a question, Jason, since we're talking about ice-penetrating radar. I know one of the other things that's being worked on is going up and seeing with ice penetrating radar, seeing when it's going to recede past Suicide Basin, and part of that is that there could be a second lake, which, if I'm right, please let me know if I'm wrong, when ice flows over water, it moves faster when a glacier is moving over water. So it might happen quicker if the lake is of a certain size. Is that right?
You're saying that the retreat could happen faster?
Right.
Basically?
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. Usually when a glacier is terminating in water, it tends to retreat a little bit faster because it can shed icebergs. It's not just melting. And so there is some evidence that there would be a second lake up from Mendenhall Lake. Still working on processing our radar data, the recent radar data, but Roman Motika, who I see sitting here, had done some radar work in the early 2000s, I think it was, and that data shows some evidence for there being a lake just outside of Suicide Basin.
Okay, thanks. Our next question, please.
Yes, hello, thank you. My name is Malachi Thornton. I live on View Drive, and I got two questions, one for each side of the panel. One, after 3 years of flooding, and most of the projections have been very conservative on the low end. Most natural disasters, people usually give warnings on the high end. It's better to be overzealous in the considerations, where all 3 years we've had, it's been the other way around. We've grossly underestimated most of these floods by up to a foot or more. And then for the city's question, I'm seeing actual brand new construction taking place on the river within feet of the edge of the river. And I was curious, that's a very strange take on disaster management to encourage more development directly on the riverfront. So I was curious on both those fronts. It seems to be a little bit disconnected from what we're otherwise normally hearing.
Army Corps first, or not Army Corps, but forecasters first.
Yeah, so prior to, 23 was the first year that we had the basin drain almost all the way to the bottom. And so that really restricted our ability to do any projections because we just didn't know how big the basin was. It didn't drain all the way to the bottom in 23, so we still hadn't quite seen what it looked like. 24, if it wasn't the bottom, you just by looking at the topography, you could see it really starting to curve in when you look at the drone data. And so after 24, we've had a much better sense of the volume, and that's really improved our ability to make projections. Last year, the projection was within a few inches, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
So I can speak to that.
Yeah.
So last year, the forecast range when we initially issued the forecast based on the volume from the drone surveys was 16.25 to 16.75. There were some timing issues on that. We had it about 4 p.m., I think, or we had a range of time between noon and 4 p.m. And then we adjusted that to have it more in the morning, but the same peak. We didn't change the range of the volume. And the reason for that was, again, the atmospheric river masked where we were in the event. When we identified where we're like, we're about 18 hours sooner in the event, we had the largest amount of rate of increase that we saw. So we saw a rate of increase every hour, the normal Mendenhall flow. So we saw 3,000 cubic feet per second pass through the gauge every single hour when that's the normal flow right now. And so when we made that adjustment, I think it was right in the window of when the peak was going to be last year. The previous year in 24, like Jason was saying, there was a little bit more water that came out of it. We were able to adjust it. We are learning every single event. We're trying to improve that forecast as much as possible.
But can I just add something to that, which is that every year is a little bit different, and as Aaron was saying, it teaches us something new. And so the way that we do the forecasting is, in short, that we have a catalog of past events, and they look very similar from one year to the next, the general shape of the hydrograph, and we use that to help us project what the flood is going to look like. But some years it drains faster than others, some years it drains all the way to the bottom, some years it doesn't. And so I was pretty happy with how we did last year with the projection, but yeah, I think you have to be cautious when you look at those numbers.
And two things with that, we're learning the shape. The shape is a lot we have a good volume, but it's the shape, how fast the water comes out. The atmospheric river definitely caused the water to come out a little bit faster last year due to head pressure. And so for this year, we're not taking exactly last year's shape. because it could be an anomaly because of the atmospheric river. We've had 44 of these outburst floods. Only one of them have coincided almost exactly with the atmospheric river. So the chances of that happening again could happen, yes, but the chances of that happening are fairly on the lower side. So instead of taking this very high release rate of 3,500 cubic feet per second, we're taking an average of the last 3 full basin releases for that shape of the hydrograph. And again, we'll be able to make those adjustments once we see how that is tracking in the event and stuff. So stay tuned after we issue the initial forecast for an update to see if there's any changes in that forecast itself. Does that help?
Yes, I mean, in some capacity, though. I'll quote even from last year when I spoke with engineers after the HESCOs went in, and we were asked, for example, on View Drive, what the projection was, and we were told we would see less than a 1% increase, and we saw 2 feet increase on one side and a 1 foot increase on the other side. So that being a bit more nuanced, but previous years the NOAA forecast was a foot off, and I understand that there's variability. Like this, the basis of the question is why wasn't there a more conservative estimate provided to the public, a bigger warning, a bigger hazard being provided to the public, as opposed to these absolutely the minimal? Why are you guys estimating on the lowest end of the spectrum when warning people as opposed to the higher end of the spectrum? There's still people on Riverside that have no concept that they are even remotely in a flood zone based off of what the warnings and the flood maps and everything else have been, and that has been a repeat for the past 2 years as well. And I'll let you guys do.
One thing that I think I would add that does express that possibility of a larger event is these annual exceedance probabilities that the Army Corps has developed. So for example, a 10% event would be 70,000 CFS. So there is these lower probability, higher magnitude events that we are trying to quantify that risk with.
I appreciate that, just to try to make more people aware of how much worse it can get. It seems like these disasters have been severely understated for the last 2 years. The first one I'll give a pass on, but the last 2 years it does strike me as they've been severely understated, and a lot of people have been blindsided because of the understatement. So, and I'll leave it to that. But as far as the city goes, I've been very surprised that there's brand new construction taking place in the river. Like a brand new house was built. Literally, last year you could have almost touched the foundation and put your hand in the river at the same time. I'm just curious of the city's outlook on development. We've seen a lot of new construction in the valley and other places, commercial buildings that are well within the floodplain. How is the city reconciling that?
Thank you for the question. The city doesn't currently have any zoning restrictions that would prevent construction there. The one issue that would potentially come up adjacent to the river would be if someone were looking to develop in the managed floodway itself, in which case there would be potential restrictions against that. But otherwise, that's something that the city could potentially look into if there was enough concern from the community to make changes to zoning to address that.
No, and I guess that is in keeping with, we've seen some substantial fill in the river, riprap that's gone out 10, 20 feet, that we have on some records that doesn't have actually engineering behind it otherwise, but we have definitely seen the river being filled in over the last year at the very least, and several years. So a lot of variability as far as what we can expect since the floodways have changed so dramatically within the last few years. So thank you.
Thanks for your questions.
I'll qualify that by saying that I also did not directly participate in the permitting process for that construction.
Yeah, I'll just put this on the record. We definitely heard from various members of the community that the vast majority of the permitting, that they were told in advance that they would not be checked on in order to be able to expedite a lot of the riverbank reinforcement, and that came directly from the city manager's office. So the vast majority of people were told, it's on the CBA's website, that there's a long list of understandable engineering practices that have to go into place, but the vast majority of those have, from what I've been told by people who are doing the work, have basically not been followed in the essence of trying to expedite and stabilize the riverway as well.
Thank you, and we'll take a next question.
Hello. I really appreciated the first comment tonight to remind us all to behave like we're in a community. And I'm going to do my best because, unfortunately, as a resident on View Drive, I don't feel like anyone at this table has treated the people who own property on my street as a community member ever since the flooding started. A charrette has just been a fancy word for holding a closed-door session, including having academic scientists looped in without any press or public comment period to make huge decisions about the future of our community. When Ms. Koch announced that there's another committee of the whole discussion at the Assembly on July 20th, what that really means is it's a community meeting where we are not allowed to make public comment. Last summer, around this time, there was a cow session, committee of the whole, where HESCO Phase 1B was announced without any public comment. As someone who lives on View Drive, I'm shocked to hear about this flood berm being built next to Backloop Bridge. I'm curious what the impact of that is anticipated to be on the homes on View Drive. I'm curious why you're building a flood berm with my house on the flood side of the wall and what that anticipated impact is. And then I'm also very concerned about the city's decision, or whoever's making the decision, for no mandatory evacuation order when there is a flood berm wall being built that's going to wall my street into the flood. That seems like a life-threatening choice to not do a mandatory evac, at least of the areas that are being walled into the floodwater.
Does anyone want to address the comment?
Yeah. Thank you. I'll try to break it down to pieces because I think there are a lot of questions in there, so I'll start and we'll go from there. I think, first off, everyone here recognizes, as much as we can, how bad it is for the residents of View Drive and the extent and repeated flooding and stress that you experience, and that's not a situation that anyone should be put in. In terms of the berm on Backloop Road's impact on View Drive, the decision to put that there was a risk-based engineering decision, and we did indeed do hydraulic modeling to determine if it would have an impact on the homes on View Drive, and the determination was that the homes that are severe, it's the same severe flooding that those residences experience now will, in terms of the number of homes and the severe extent that will continue to, could be caused by that berm.
What do you mean by severe? Does that mean not more than 1% rise for the same size flood? Or does that mean that instead of 3 feet in my home, we'll have 8?
No, I think that's really good that you asked that. We can absolutely quantify that. That change, the modeled change in inundation is within the error of the model. So if you look at that model change and you look at how precise that model is, there is less model change than there is precision in the model.
I honestly don't understand what you just said. How many, if it's the same size flood last year, how much deeper will the water be in my house?
Right. If it's the same size flood, it will not impact the flooding in your home.
0% impact?
Correct.
Okay.
Then maybe I'll address the question about mandatory evacuations. I'm not even sure if the city has the authority to do mandatory evacuations, which is why we are very much planning to improve our communications about encouraging people to voluntarily evacuate. But a mandatory evacuation requires a lot of authority. You get also into situations where, what do you do when somebody doesn't evacuate? Do you force them from their homes? Who enforces that? It winds up getting pretty dicey, which is why we very strongly encourage voluntary evacuations, and we're going to strengthen our messaging around that. But I don't think it's realistic that the city would do a mandatory evacuation.
Thank you for answering. I know it's not your job to do emergency management, so you're filling in, but it's quite concerning that city leadership 3 years into this catastrophic national emergency level flood doesn't know if we can do a mandatory evac. And I think we all grew up watching the mandatory evac orders in Hurricane Alley, Florida, and we heard about it in the California wildfires. They don't mean that you rip people from their homes. They just mean people can't go back. So.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Our next question, please.
Hi, I'm Deborah Rudis. I also live on River Road. So my question is also about the dike that's being built parallel to Back Loop. I really don't understand how that's going to work, and will that actually reduce the water velocity that's going down the river as well?
So the decision and process behind deciding to do that dike was based on our hydraulic modeling and looking at certain flows. The Mendenhall River leaves the channel upstream of the bridge and intrudes over Back Loop Road and then into the Mendenhall Valley neighborhood. So by putting that berm there, it significantly reduces the ability of water to do that until a very large gulf event occurs. So by putting that relatively small berm in that area, you're protecting a huge amount of the valley from a large gulf event.
Thanks for the question. Next question, please.
My name is Sam Hatch. I live on Meander. My question is related to emergency management and what we're going to see as people who live in the flood zone and as someone who's going to stay. So last time, or previous incarnations where we see a GLOF, the GLOF lasts for the 56 hours that you're talking about. We're getting much better information on that, right? But how long is the water going to touch those barriers when we're looking at that? And when's the first time I'm going to see emergency management? How long can the pumps run? And when's the next time am I going to see somebody in my neighborhood? Are they coming with extra fuel to fuel up the pumps, which can only run for 24 hours during a 56-hour flood? How long do the pumps need to be on? When will they be on? Who's going to turn them on? Now that's kind of like a whole of response question, and that's probably going to fall to different people. But that's kind of what I'd like to know. What's that experience going to be like? When are we going to see people? Who do I talk to when they come through?
Thanks for the question. Who would like to take it?
I can start, and I do think there's probably more that other panelists can add. We're meeting multiple times every week to finalize the pump plan. As you mentioned, the pumps that we have available, we have upwards of 40 pumps that will be here in Juneau through our partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers, some of those owned by the Army Corps and some of those leased. The pump plan, which is available on the CBJ website, includes the planned installation or location of about 36 pumps with 7 backup pumps. It's highly likely that we'll have 4 teams staged within the area throughout the flood response time, that they could go back to those areas and address maintenance-related issues, replace a pump that was malfunctioning, refuel pumps. We obviously have to balance that out with maintaining the safety of personnel operating in that area as well. But plan on the pumps being turned on as personnel move away from immediately on or behind the barriers before the flood. The pumps many of the pumps at least are capable of being turned on, running dry if they need to, or are potentially remote operated so that we could have control and monitoring of those pumps, even if we're not physically present at the site of the pump. So CBJ will be responsible for the operation and maintenance of the pumps, but we won't be alone. We'll have teams of folks with the Army Corps of Engineers and with mechanics from the vendors that have provided the pumps so that we can keep track of those and make sure that they're remaining functional. And I don't know if anyone else has anything.
So when will they be turned on? How much water?
They'll likely be turned on before we see water coming through the barriers, is my point.
And I'd also like to add that, again, during the flood preparedness training that we are supporting City and Borough of Juneau on, we are bringing some of our pump experts from the vendors to help train do a deeper dive in training on these pumps, because as Nate mentioned, there are a variety of pumps that are remote operated. They do dry run. So we want to make sure that all staff that are going to be in the field maintaining these are accurately trained to respond to any, as you mentioned, refueling emergencies or breakdowns that may occur. So.
Additionally, with that, Tlingit and Haida was able to participate in some of those trainings. And I do know that last year, a really good resource was, of course, the individuals in the impacted area. The hotline was used to hear a lot of reporting back from what you guys are seeing if you are choosing to stay. That was a really informative piece of information we were able to use and take and tailor our response almost live during the flooding itself as well. Again, not encouraging people to stay. Please evacuate, but if you are choosing, that information is choosing to stay, that information is very valuable. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the question. Next question, please.
Can I just add one other thing that kind of touches on the last two questions about evacuations and people deciding to stay and people who want to go, and the questions about whether or not CBJ has the authority to issue a mandatory evacuation order. I did just get a phone a friend. That is correct. We do not have the authority to issue a mandatory evacuation order. However, CBJ can request a mandatory evacuation order to the state level, to the governor's office, and that would be a decision that the governor would make or not. So if some of that feedback on whether people want more forceful evacuation orders or they don't, they want voluntary evacuation orders, would probably be helpful feedback for you to provide both to us and to the Assembly.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Scott Gindy, I live on Killowitz Drive. First, I wanted to say I very much appreciate everyone's efforts coming out. I know this is a hard thing, an evolving process, a lot of uncertainty. I do want to do a shout out to one of the city engineers, Carlton. I know that some of our neighbors have also had a similar experience with other engineers who have been phenomenal in terms of returning our calls, communication, trying to interpret kind of an evolving, very fluid process, no pun intended. My question is that seems like 90% of what we're talking about is focused on the temporary, like the HESCOs, the evacuations, the modeling uncertainty, the basins, everything, none of which matters once we get a long-term solution in place. So can we just pivot back for a second to the core and talk about the long-term solution and the timing? I mean, we have two numbers lingering out there, 5 years, the length of the HESCOs, 25 years, our best estimate in terms of how long this is going to be a problem. What's the bureaucratic uncertainty? Like, what's the process by which you do your proper vetting? What milestones need to be made before you start to make decisions and we can start to work toward allocating money toward moving toward a long-term solution? We've heard 10 years or so. We've heard maybe even longer from the time that the studies are actually initiated. But can we just dive into that a little bit more? Because really that's what we should, would mitigate some of this and have a better understanding as to, you know, how do we lobby collectively as a community that maybe we can reduce down the amount of time by which the Corps starts to implement the long-term solution?
Responses.
That is exactly why our senior leadership has been meeting with local expertise like the miners, is to try to figure out how we can most efficiently address this problem, and figure out how to navigate our own systems to do that efficiently. And that is what we were trying to nail down, is how long that will take and how we can leverage local expertise to reduce that time. So that is an ongoing process, is figuring that out and figuring out under which authority we can do different measures or solutions.
Thanks so much for the question. Next question, please.
Could I add to that?
Can I just do a follow-up? Like, we've heard 10 years. Why 10 years? Like, what goes into that 10-year estimate, and why not 5, or why not 12, or why not, you know, whatever? Like, what? I know you're doing the best you can, but can you provide some insight as to what the process is in order to get to where we need to go?
So we fully recognize that question, that there is a lot of uncertainty. And again, the Corps is evaluating all the different authorities that they have, which again, because of the uncertainty, the complexity of this issue, we want to make sure that we are evaluating the options as best we can, because one, it does have cost implications, and there are people's livelihoods at stake. So again, that's why General Getz was out here, again, trying to help minimize those timelines and be more efficient for the Corps to implement a solution. And in the short term, the Corps is here, understanding we are kind of the primary focus right now on the short-term solution, but we are here to do our best to mitigate flooding for residents within the Mendenhall Valley.
Thanks again. Next question, I believe that's Debbie. Thank you.
Thank you. I had questions in mind, and then I listened to the other questions, and I go a different direction. Thank you for being on the panel and what could feel like a hot seat. It's not an easy job that you have, and it's not an easy job that we have, and I say we as in the community, because at some point we have to come together. And so questions and opportunities like tonight are a good way to start sorting through and finding a way to find what we can agree on and what we can grab together and run with. So my question is this: when it comes to the river, my phone has blown up with people saying, there's heavy equipment in the river. I've counted the trucks that have gone by. There's so much rock. How can this be? And I've heard the explanation, but I would love, if you don't mind, my dear Army Corps friends, to say again how you feel comfortable with that, because other folks on the other side of the aisle are saying, can this not have changed the way the river flows and how high and fast it goes? And they're very uncomfortable with that. And then my second question, if I could, was about the change to the Forest Service property. I listened to the community of the whole meeting on the 4th, and I heard, I think it was you, Mike, that talked about that this subject matter, the issue, had come to your attention a couple weeks before. So that's not a whole lot of time. And I want to know whatever that record fast process was that took the issue that you identified and resulted in the clearing of that property for an earthen wall. Can we do that for the lake tap? So.
Thanks so much for the question, Debbie.
I'll talk about the changes to the river, and then maybe if Darrell wants, you can take the second part. So in terms of quantifying changes to the river, in our partnership with CBJ and the Forest Service, we collected cross sections from the ocean up to Mendenhall Lake of elevation profiles of Mendenhall River in 2025, and we're looking at doing that again, and then we can then use that to update our hydraulic model to fully quantify the current hydraulic conditions in the Mendenhall River. But it is a challenging situation because, and people have touched on this, and it's just the change in the river, and I think about that too with View Drive and people's experiences on View Drive, how much water levels have changed over the years. And it's an evolving river, it's a young river, it's a hungry river because it first goes through Mendenhall Lake and drops a lot of sediment out of it. So it is a tricky question that at some level we are just going to have to move forward with the conditions in the river, because every year that river is going to continue to change, and a foot of elevation change in the lake is not going to equal a foot of elevation change on View Drive or down at Killowitch, and a foot one year at View Drive is not necessarily going to be a foot the next year at View Drive. So we are actively looking at how we can update our hydraulic model for current conditions, but we also recognize that there will never be a perfect understanding because it continues to change.
Okay. Thank you.
And then to address your question about the process, so that was a very heavy lift. So as I believe everybody knows, there's been a lot of changes over the last few months with what the Corps has been doing, with what the city and borough has been doing up and down the river. We, the Corps of Engineers, are implementing all emergency processes that we can. The issue with the flooding over the road by Back Loop Bridge was brought to our attention very late in the game, late April, I believe. The coordination between the Forest Service, the Corps, City and Borough of Juneau, Tlingit Haida, DOT, a lot of that was preemptive because of all the conversations, all the meetings that happened previously. We did have the right people in the room at that given time and literally dropped everything to make that happen because they did see a solution. So with that being said, my job as kind of PM for phase 2 was getting that to that fruition through the contracting and construction process. We relied heavily on a lot of local knowledge. We do have an existing contract in place, which helped sped up the process to get a contract modification in place. And we have great contractors who are actually implementing the construction. So it was not just a single entity. The Corps wasn't just one person. It was a group effort from all the folks up here and folks that were not up here to make that happen, because there was a solution, a reasonable solution that was implementable before the flood. So it was definitely a huge lift for a lot of folks, not just for, again, the Corps or CBJ. It was a huge lift for everybody.
Thank you. We'd like that for the long-term fix too. Pretty please. And View Drive, you are not forgotten.
Thank you for your question. Next question, please. Are those all that we have? We have one more? Okay.
Follow-up question from earlier. You mentioned that a diversion channel had been considered or was being considered. Where is that? It's not something I've heard a lot about. And I don't know if there's good reasons not to, but where is that in your considerations?
There are several versions of that we have looked at, going from all the way up at Mendenhall Lake, possibly diverting water through a tunnel to Auk Bay would be one example that we looked at. And the other ones are on the west side of the Mendenhall River, along that public trail through the forest there, which would potentially include some change to the hillside there to fit it in. And then another one that we looked at is down in I'm worried I'm getting the name wrong, is it Wild Meadow neighborhood? So that is upstream of the highway bridge, and then that diversion channel would then continue, I guess it's kind of southwest, and exit into, is that Fritz Cove down there? Another one that we did look at is on the east side, if there was any way of conveying water through Duck Creek. So those are examples of 4 different diversions that we have and continue to look at.
When you say continue to look at, what does that mean?
That means that our senior leadership take this project very seriously, and our leadership team is looking at all the options on the table to use all of their vast experience and knowledge to make the best decision.
Thank you. I'm pressing you on this one because, I love the idea of the tunnel. I mean, I'm cool with that, but I'm looking at this and going, it's a lot easier to dig a channel down at sea level near road access than it is to put in a tunnel. So I'm looking at that in the medium term and thinking, how much are you actually thinking about that?
Yeah, we've thought a lot about it. We've done a lot of hydraulic modeling about it. And one thing that I will add that is a limitation of many of those bypass channels is they do not protect the whole Mendenhall, the reach of Mendenhall River. It would still leave, for example, View Drive would not be protected by that. So that is just one of many considerations that we're looking at when we consider one of the many diversions or a diversion versus a different alternative.
Thank you for your question. And I'll add one more on the same theme, kind of crystallizing a lot of what we've heard from the audience tonight. When is it that you think you'll stop looking and you'll get the wheels turning on the doing?
I don't think either of us, the people can answer that. I don't know if...
Can you phone a friend?
Yeah, I don't know if James Cicita can provide any more insight into that.
Yeah, would you mind? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is James Cicita. I'm the Chief of Engineering with the Corps of Engineers, Alaska District. I think in August you'll see some movement on where we're going with a medium term and on the technical report that we wrote. So just hang in there. We have to have enough information for the deciding, for our senior leaders to decide to make a decision on this. We are working as closely as we can with CBJ, but a lot of this work that we're doing, since we're under an emergency type process, we can't really share a lot of information with people. And I know it's something that you really want to know, but we just can't talk about it until our senior leaders evaluate it and make a decision. So that's where we are. But I think in August, you'll probably see some movement on some of the decisions that'll be made. Thanks.
Thanks so much for addressing the question. I'll take one more.
Gunakchish, I know I jumped in there. And thank you for that. My name is Mandy Malat. I live on View Drive. And on behalf of all of our neighborhood, I want to thank the city and Aaron Jacobs with the Weather Service, Jamie Pierce with the USGS, Jason and Aaron Hood with UAS for just spending time with us and listening to us and caring with us, doing what you can, even if it's information. And the Army Corps, thank you, all of you, for doing everything that you have been for our whole community. It's, we're community members as well, so we're really thankful, and it's exciting to watch. We love the collaboration with the tribe as well, Sabrina, so we celebrate that. But for the Army Corps, for all of you, I invite you, we've invited you before as well, to just come and talk with us, meet with us on our homes, on our properties along View Drive. You spoke, Mike, to the change in the river. Absolutely, it's changed all around View Drive. And it's compelling because is there now something that could be done? Even if it's up to us as homeowners, we would love to have this conversation and this dialogue directly with you all at the Army Corps. And you speak to in August when we might hear more, what does that midterm solution look like for us as homeowners on View Drive? Like, I'm shaking right now because this is, many of us have been there for decades and decades. And so far we have had nothing offered to us. Gunakchish, thank you.
Thank you so much. And that's all the time we have. I have one last note before we wrap up. We have a membership table run by Fleur-de-Lino outside. As many of you know, KTOO lost a third of its annual budget due to a federal funding rescission last year. That's a $1.2 million hole we'll face every year going forward. If you're not already a member and you appreciate KTOO's programs and coverage, please consider chatting with Fleur-de-Lino and grabbing a button on the way out. Thank you so much for joining KTOO and coming to this panel tonight. I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.